Two moments decades apart. First, Uppsala Castle, May 24th, 1567. King Erik XIV, son of Gustav Vasa, stands over the body of a nobleman he has just stabbed in a paranoid rage. The entire Sture family, once his closest allies, lie dead in the courtyard. The king will soon disappear into the forest, wandering in peasant clothes, completely incoherent. Second, Stockholm Harbor, August 10th, 1628. The warship Vasa, the most heavily armed vessel in the Baltic, catches a gentle breeze, heels over, and sinks before it ever leaves the harbor. Thousands watch in silence as the pride of the Swedish Navy vanishes beneath the water. Between these two moments lies the story of a dynasty built on iron will and torn apart by the very ambition that made it great. And at the heart of it all, a king who tried to marry Elizabeth I of England and lost his mind when everything else slipped away. Welcome back to Beyond the Swedish Postcard, coming to you today from what I can only describe as the Thunderdome of heat. Europe is having a record heat wave, and I am in Scandinavia experiencing it for myself, melting into a puddle while I tell you about mad kings and sunken ships. It feels appropriate, honestly. Everything is a little unhinged right now. All right, so let's talk about the Vasa dynasty. Gustav Vasa died in 1560 after nearly 40 years on the throne. He had broken the Kalmar Union, seized the church, crushed peasant rebellions, and built a centralized state from nothing. Sweden was no longer a fractured collection of provinces. It was a kingdom, but Gustav left behind a problem. Four sons: Erik, Johann, Magnus, and Karl. In his will, Gustav gave his younger sons duchies. Johann got Finland, Magnus got Östergötland, Karl got Södermanland. These were semi-independent territories with their own venues and armies. Gustav wanted to provide for all his sons, but he also planted the seeds of fraternal war. A duke with his own castle and his own soldiers might start to wonder why his older brother got the crown. Erik, the eldest, inherited the throne. He was 14 when his father became king, and he had been groomed for power his entire life. He was cultured, well-educated, fluent in multiple languages, a talented musician, an amateur astronomer. He was also deeply, fundamentally insecure. He was the son of a king, but his mother was a German noblewoman, not royalty. In the marriage market of 16th century Europe, that mattered. Erik spent his early reign trying to fix that perceived deficiency, and he set his sights on the most eligible Protestant woman in the world. Erik XIV's pursuit of Elizabeth I of England is one of the great what-if stories of European history. It was ambitious, obsessive, and ultimately humiliating, and it deserves its own chapter. Erik began his courtship almost as soon as he took the throne. He sent a formal proposal to Elizabeth in 1561. He dispatched his half-brother Johann, Duke of Finland, to London to negotiate. He wrote letters in Latin, the diplomatic language of the time, declaring his admiration and his intentions. Elizabeth, for her part, did what Elizabeth always did. She entertained the proposal. She smiled. She delayed. The historian Michael Roberts, in his classic work, The Early Vasas, describes Erik's pursuit as both a strategic necessity and an emotional obsession. Erik genuinely seemed to believe that marrying Elizabeth would transform Sweden into a first-rank European power. He would gain an ally against Denmark in the Hanseatic League, access to English trade networks, and the personal legitimacy of being the husband of the Virgin Queen. He even began planning to sail to England personally, an almost unheard of risk for a sitting monarch, to press his case in person. Elizabeth, of course, had no intention of marrying him. She strung Erik along for years, sending encouraging but non-committal replies, always finding reasons to delay. At one point, she suggested that Erik should come to England, then promptly withdrew the invitation when he seemed likely to accept. She was the most sought-after bride in Europe, and she knew it. Erik was one suitor among many. The rejection, when it finally became undeniable, was a profound humiliation. Erik had invested years of diplomatic effort, enormous sums of money, and his own fragile ego in this marriage project. When it collapsed, something in him seemed to break. He grew more suspicious, more erratic, more convinced that the world was conspiring against him. The man who would later stab a nobleman in a cell had already been wounded deeply by a queen who never wanted him. If you search for Erik XIV, Elizabeth I, or Swedish king proposed to Queen Elizabeth, you find portraits of both of them painted around the same time, looking regal and hopeful, and completely unaware that one of them was about to unravel. Before the unraveling, though, Erik's reign showed genuine promise. He promoted trade, encouraged merchants from the Netherlands and England to set up shop in Swedish ports. He expanded the navy, recognizing that control of the Baltic Sea was essential for Swedish power. He introduced a system of royal patents to encourage innovation in mining, shipbuilding, and manufacturing. He was, in many ways, a Renaissance prince, interested in science, art, and the mechanics of state building. But the pressures of rule were relentless. The Northern Seven Years' War against Denmark erupted in 1563 and drained the treasury. The war was brutal, fought on land and sea, with neither side gaining decisive advantage. It would drag on until 1570, long after Erik himself was gone. The war also forced Erik to rely more and more on his secretary, Johan Persson. Persson was a commoner, a man of immense ability and immense ruthlessness. He had risen through the ranks of the royal chancery and had become Erik's most trusted advisor. Persson was efficient, he was loyal, and he fed Erik's paranoia. The nobility despised Persson. He was a commoner wielding power that should have been theirs, and he was a man whispering in the king's ear, suggesting that the old families were plotting, that only Erik could trust himself and his closest servants. Persson became the king's enforcer and his echo chamber. Together, they began to see enemies everywhere. One of those enemies in Erik's mind was his own half-brother. Johan, Duke of Finland, had been a loyal servant of the crown in earlier years. Erik had sent him to London to negotiate with Elizabeth. He had trusted him. But in 1562, Johan made a decision that Erik saw as unforgivable. He married Katarina Jagiellonica, the sister of the King of Poland. Poland was an enemy of Sweden in the Baltic conflict. A marriage alliance between a Swedish duke and the Polish princess was, in Erik's eyes, an act of treason. Johan was supposed to be fighting the Poles, not marrying them. Erik demanded that Johan return to Sweden and answer for his disobedience. Johan refused. He fortified Åbo Castle in Finland and prepared for war. Erik summoned the Riksdag and had Johan convicted of treason in absentia. Royal troops besieged Åbo Castle, and the siege lasted weeks, with cannon fire battering the walls. Eventually, Johan surrendered. He and his wife were brought to Sweden in chains and imprisoned in a gloomy fortress on the shores of Lake Mälaren. The fraternal fracture was complete. A Vasa brother had imprisoned another Vasa brother. The nobility watched and grew uneasy. If a king could do this to his own blood, what might he do to them? The war dragged on, the treasury bled, and Erik's mind began to fracture. His behavior grew increasingly erratic. He swung between grandiosity and despair, issuing ambitious plans one day and retreating into isolation the next. He trusted no one except Johan Persson. He began to hallucinate. He accused servants of poisoning his food. He ordered arrests based on rumors and suspicions, then reversed himself hours later. The court lived in a state of constant fear. Erik's paranoia settled most heavily on the Sture family. The Stures were one of Sweden's most ancient and powerful noble houses. They had served the Vasa dynasty faithfully. Niels Sture, the head of the family, had been one of Erik's most trusted advisors. But Erik became convinced the Stures were plotting against him, possibly in league with his imprisoned brother Johan. Niels Sture was arrested, released, arrested again. He was publicly humiliated, forced to walk through the streets of Stockholm in degrading conditions. Erik's treatment of him grew more and more vicious, and through it all, Johan Persson was taking the king's side, whispering. By the spring of 1567, Erik was a man on the edge of complete collapse. On May 24th, 1567, Erik XIV summoned a group of noblemen to the Uppsala castle and told them he wanted reconciliation. He wanted to put the suspicions and accusations behind them. The nobles came, warily, hoping that perhaps the king had finally calmed. Instead, Erik had them arrested and thrown into cells. What happened next is one of the darker moments in Swedish royal history. Erik entered Niels Store's cell. They argued. Erik, in a fit of paranoid rage, drew a knife and stabbed Sture repeatedly. Niels Sture died on the floor of his cell. Erik then ordered the guards to kill the other prisoners. Several more noblemen, including members of the Sture family, were executed in the courtyard. The Sture murder shocked Sweden. This was not an execution ordered by a rational king. This was a massacre carried out by a man who had lost grip on reality. In the aftermath, Erik disappeared from the castle. For 3 days, no one could find him. He was eventually discovered wandering the countryside dressed in peasant clothes, incoherent and barely responsive. Johan Persson, widely blamed for enabling the king's madness, was dismissed from service and later arrested by nobility. He was executed a year later, tortured and broken, a scapegoat for the king's crimes. The nobility had seen enough. Erik's half-brothers, Johan and Karl, united against him. In 1568, they led a rebellion that quickly gained support for the powerful noble families who had been terrorized by Erik's paranoia. Stockholm fell. Erik was deposed and imprisoned. He would spend the next 9 years in captivity, moved from castle to castle, always under guard. His wife, Karen, a former servant whom Erik had married in a rare moment of tenderness, remained loyal to him throughout. She is often portrayed as one of the few genuinely good figures in this dark story. Johan became King Johan III. He was crowned in 1567 and set about undoing much of Erik's legacy. But the ghost of his brother remained. Erik, though imprisoned, was still alive, and a living, deposed king was always a potential threat. In February 1577, Erik XIV died in Urbyhus Castle. The official cause of death was recorded as illness, but there were persistent rumors of poison. Centuries later, in 1958, forensic scientists exhumed Erik's remains and tested them. They found extremely high levels of arsenic in his body. The pea soup he had eaten before his death, it seems, had been laced with poison. Whether Johan III ordered the killing remains uncertain, but the evidence strongly suggests that Erik did not die a natural death. The Vasa dynasty continued. Johan III reigned until 1592, followed by his son Sigismund, who was deposed by his uncle Karl. Karl IX reigned until 1611, followed by his son Gustavus Adolphus. Gustavus Adolphus was everything Erik XIV wanted to be: a brilliant military commander, a respected Protestant leader, a king who made Sweden a great European power. Under his rule, Sweden dominated the Baltic and intervened decisively in the 30 Years' War. And in 1626, Gustavus Adolphus commissioned a warship that would demonstrate Sweden's power to the world. The Vasa was built at the Royal Shipyard in Stockholm. It was enormous for its time, over 60 meters long, carrying 64 bronze cannons, decorated with hundreds of carved sculptures painted in vivid colors and gold leaf. It was a floating monument to the Vasa dynasty, covered in images of Swedish kings, biblical heroes, and mythical beasts. Its hull was painted red and gold. Its mast rose over 50 meters over the water, but the Vasa had a fatal flaw. Its design was dangerously unstable. The ship's builders, under intense pressure from the king to produce a larger and more heavily armed vessel than any rival, made the hull too narrow and too top-heavy. The weight at the bottom of the ship that keeps it upright was insufficient. Engineers warned that the ship might be unstable, but no one wanted to tell the king. On August 10th, 1628, before a crowd of thousands gathered in Stockholm harbor, the Vasa set sail on its maiden voyage. It traveled barely 1,300 meters. A gust of wind caught the sails. The ship heeled over, water flooded through the open gun ports, and within minutes, the most powerful warship in the Baltic sank beneath the waves. Dozens of crew members drowned. The pride of the Swedish Navy was gone. An inquest was held. Blame was thrown in every direction: the shipbuilder, the captain, the admiral that had approved the design. But no one was ever held accountable. The king, Gustav Adolphus, was away in Poland, commanding his armies. The Vasa sank while he was winning battles. The ship that bore his family's name became a silent embarrassment. The Vasa sat in the mud of Stockholm Harbor for 333 years. It was rediscovered in the 1950s by an amateur archaeologist named Anders Franzen, who spent years searching for it with a grappling hook and a small boat. In 1961, the ship was raised in a massive salvage operation that captivated the world. It was remarkably well preserved, the cold, brackish water of the Baltic having protected it from shipworms. Today, the Vasa Museum is the most visited museum in Scandinavia. Millions of people have stood before the ship, gazing up at its towering hull, its intricate carvings, its silent testimony to ambition and failure. The Vasa is more than an engineering disaster. It's a symbol of the entire Vasa dynasty's tragic arc. Gustav Vasa built a state with ruthless pragmatism. His son Erik reached for glory and found madness. His grandson, Gustav Adolphus, built a warship so ambitious it couldn't stay upright. The dynasty produced brilliance and ruin in equal measure. Erik XIV tried to marry a queen and stabbed a nobleman instead. The Vasa ship sailed 1,000 meters and sank. Between them lies a century of ambition, paranoia, fraternal war, and the desperate hunger to be great. The Sweden that Gustav Vasa built would outlast his dynasty's chaos, but not without deep and lasting scars. So here we are, from the Thunderdome heat of a Scandinavian summer. I've been telling you about a mad king and a sunken ship and a family that couldn't stop fighting itself. Erik XIV poisoned by pea soup. The Vasa sank in view of thousands, a monument to hubris that now draws more visitors than any other museum in the Nordics. Next episode, we'll keep moving forward. Gustavus Adolphus and Sweden's brief, blazing era as a great power. The ship sank, but the empire kept growing for a while. Also, if you're enjoying the podcast, it would mean so much if you shared it with someone who's also trying to figure this country out. And if you haven't followed or subscribed yet, hit that button so you don't miss what comes next. And keep looking beyond the Swedish postcard. Tack so mycket for listening, and hej då for now.